Hello, Prestige heads, and welcome to another American Prestige Q&A.
Wow, first time Prestige head from Derek.
First time.
I like it.
Yeah, well, I can't say American Prestige listeners because people are watching this on video, so that doesn't work.
Viewers,
so
watchers, gooners, all.
Viewers. That sounds weird. Anyway, here's how we do this. Subscribers to American Prestige who join our Discord have the opportunity to submit questions to Danny and myself. We pick one of those questions each week to answer here in video form. So if you're not subscribed to the show, please do that. And if you are subscribed but haven't joined the Discord, please do that. And last but not least, please subscribe to our wonderful YouTube channel here. Like these videos and all of those things. I'm sure you guys know how this stuff works probably better than Danny and I do. So with that, why don't we get into this week's question, which comes from Tom S. What's the role of ideas/ideology in history and foreign policy today? Same as ever? And he follows up here with, seems like the dumb ideas of the sclerotic gerontocracy and mega-rich people matter a lot when there are no institutions to channel democratic opposition. Danny, your take.
The role of ideas. I think on one hand, ideas clearly matter because how one understands the world at the individual level really shapes how one acts in the world, what they think is possible, what they think is not possible, who they think they need to align with, who they don't think they need to align with, clearly shapes how people interact in the world and how they interact in policy. I think that's obvious. But I think that the thing that has transformed is the role of ideology in politics. And I'm writing something about this now, or at least thinking about writing something about this now, maybe, which is the role of ideology in contemporary politics. Because I think that a lot of our analysis might be a bit distorted because we oftentimes, particularly today, try to understand political action and political behavior through ideology. The idea that a system of interlinking notions that provide a semi-comprehensive, holistic framework of the world shape how people interact with it or in it. But I'm not sure this is actually the case. I think that for a lot of the 20th century, that ideology really did have a profound effect on things. That how one understood liberalism or how one understood fascism or communism or socialism shaped how people interacted in the world, partially because a lot of those ideologies were linked to movements in reality, whether you're talking about associations, liberal foreign policy, you're talking about the Foreign Policy Association, the civic organization. If you're talking about communism, you're talking about the CPUSA. If you're talking about social democracy, you're talking about either New Deal liberalism on the right end of social democracy or the literal socialist party of Eugene Debs on the left wing. And all of these institutions and ideas interlinked and worked together and formed a type of coherent life world that people could really spend their lives interacting with. You know, you wake up in the morning, you go to school, and then you go to a political education program. And then your dad, works at the factory, and then he goes bowling with everyone on his socialist team. And so you have a world in which ideology and material reality, or really ideology and lived experience, wind up reinforcing one another. But one of the things that I think has happened in the last 40, 50 years, the last 1, 2, maybe even 3 generations, is that as capitalism has proceeded, not unregulated, but not regulated to the degree that I think you or I think it needs to be, a lot of those life worlds came apart. Civic associations came apart. Famously, what was it, Putnam, who wrote Bowling Alone? People now bowl alone. And I think that's essentially at its base, not due to any cultural transformation, but due to the transformation of the American political economy away from mass-based work in an industrial center on the one hand, and more recently, the alienation of white-collar work and the emergence of a gig economy on one hand and remote work on the other. And as someone who loves remote work, believe me, I'm not trashing it, but it's just a reality that it's disrupted these social bonds. And when social bonds are disrupted, I think ideology itself begins to become less important because it's not linked to any lived experience. So that's on one hand. And then one quick thing that I think I will add, but I could go into this in more detail, is that the end of the Cold War also meant, per Fukuyama's "The End of History?" question mark, and then the unquestioned marked "End of History" and the Last Man book, that liberalism triumphed. And what Fukuyama thought was that liberalism would become the defining ideology. But I argued in my review about Fukuyama is I think what actually has happened is that ideology has kind of withered away when capitalism has become the only genuine political option. And we've actually, I'll drop it here. We've done a series on China from 1949 that we're going to be releasing soon. And one of the big lessons of that series is that to a significant degree, modern China is capitalist. It's a different type of capitalism than the United States is, that for sure. That's for sure. I think the United States is a much more of a free market capitalism, at least when it comes to certain sectors, the oligarchic sectors of the economy. And China is a much more state-directed capitalism. And Russia, I would say, post Yeltsin, is just a kleptocratic capitalism. That there isn't this notion of providing for the general good in either of these countries in the same way that there might have used to be. So, in that sense, I also think that instead of liberalism triumphing as an ideology, capitalism has triumphed as a political economic system. And when there's no competing political economic visions, ideology itself has actually begun to exert less and less influence on world affairs. And that's an essay that I'm thinking about writing now. Although I'm a bit, the reason I haven't written it yet, and honestly, people comment in the comments section, and also feel free to comment more. I really like reading them, and perhaps we'll even respond at times. But how one would approach the sort of genuine end of ideology, because when Daniel Bell used the term end of ideology in the end of ideology, I think it's called the exhaustion of political ideas in the 50s, if I'm remembering correctly. I think it came out in 60. He basically meant sort of like a mixed economy, social democracy, liberalism hybrid that he thought would be hegemonic until neoliberalism came. But now I think there's a genuine end of ideology, that ideas and ideological systems, ideational systems, actually matter less in the 21st century than they did in the 20th. So that's how I would respond to Tom's question. But what do you think, Derek?
So I do think this is a uniquely unideological period, and I know, Danny, you've said that the 20th century was uniquely ideological, but I wonder if that's the case, or if this is the outlier, if we're living through the outlier now. Because the 20th century, obviously, you had the great global battle between capitalism and communism, but you also had lingering what I would say were ideological struggles in parts of the world like the Middle East. In the Arab world, you had what's known as the Arab Cold War, which was basically a carryover, I think, of 19th century ideas of republicanism versus monarchy. You can go back to the French Revolution, and exporting the ideals of the French Revolution caused a lot of chaos in Europe because people were struggling over what those concepts meant. And I think it may have reached a peak in the 20th century, but what we're in now feels very different. It feels just like there's no real rallying point or disagreement in the big picture. There's just a lot of little fights over who gets to be in charge, or do I have $1 more in my bank account than my neighbor, and it's made everything pettier and coarser, I think. Partly, I wonder if this is just a function of, like, we're out of ideas, which seems, probably not the case. But I do think the something we've talked about, you alluded to in your response, the atomization of society, the like drawing in of people to their homes, and the destruction of any kind of common space or mass media or anything that links people together and could create, affinities where you talk about stuff and you come to, some agreement on things, and you form a movement, and that movement competes with other movements. It's just gone. We don't have that anymore. And I do feel like it has drawn everything down to the level of the individual, and, like, what do I have, and what does the next guy over, next door to me have, and should I resent that for some reason? And a lot of the meanness, maybe, that we see around us could be explained by that. But I'm curious if your take on the 20th century versus previous centuries or previous periods.
So to me, ideologies are almost necessarily defined by masses of people believing in them. Otherwise, they're almost philosophies. So a bunch of monks having an idea in the 14th or 15th century, and creating a particular ideational system would not, to me, classify itself as an ideology, because I think it has to be linked to an era of democratic, not in the sense of liberal democracy in the sense of voting, but like mass participation in politics. That ideologies shape how hundreds of thousands, millions of people, tens of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people understand the world. And I think today that people just see the world, and it really reminds me of what I've read about 90s Russia, where it's just like no one gives a shit about anything. It's basically all fake. And it's just what can you get for you and yours as quickly as possible, and everything else be damned. And that seems to me, of course, the approach to the world, of someone like Trump, of someone like Musk, of the various oligarchs who govern society. I mean, to be honest, is it really that different from someone like Hunter Biden and Joe Biden? We're putting Hunter on that Ukrainian gas company board so he could collect a check and basically do nothing, or Hunter who made his career just going from consultant, founding consulting firm and various other firms, basically because his last name was Biden. Or is it that different from Obama getting that whatever $100 million plus deal from Netflix or Hulu or
Netflix.
whoever he did? I mean, like that's just like a money grab, and I think people
Right.
see that like no other no president was like Jimmy Carter, who devoted himself to Habitat for Humanity and basically living out Christian ethics and values. That everyone's just getting theirs to create general wealth for their family. It doesn't seem like they really believe in anything.
Well, that
And
I
I
mean, that
think
is a
people
new
saw that.
thing,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's an Obama. I mean, it's really Clinton, I guess, and up, depending on your views of the Clinton Foundation and its purpose. But prior to that, you had Ronald Reagan, who was senile by the time his presidency ended and couldn't really do anything. You had Carter, who went out and built homes for the rest of his life and did charitable work, actual charitable work. Um, it's either presidents once they left office kind of faded away, or they stuck around in ways that made you think that they believed in something. It's not until these last 20 years, I think, or maybe 20 to 25, that you have presidents leaving office and just like, yeah, like, as you said, like you've got uh, you know Obama doing $100 million gig at Netflix. Like, come on, man. Like, what is actually your underlying beliefs, if you have any? And yeah, Trump has always been a crook. He's always had a handout for finding a grift to jump on. And yeah, it does feel like there's nothing, even there's no exemplar to look to, even to kind of orient yourself toward.
I think that's right. And I think that's what happens when there's basically no challenge to the reigning political economic system. Because what ultimately are you even discussing? If capitalism is just basically taking over the world instead of for North Korea, what are we even talking about here? What is there even to fight about? And this is, I think, revealed to me in the fact that there hasn't been any real ideology to challenge sort of general standard liberalism. I mean, I don't know if you disagree, Derek, but the far right to me today doesn't seem to really have like a coherent ideology. It seems like a blend of reactionary, nostalgic approaches drawn at semi random from the
It's just
American
resentment.
past.
I mean, it's all just
Resentment
resentment.
and
Yeah.
greed. It seems to
Right.
me like, and that's not really an ideology,
But it's
right?
but
It's not
it's not even like greed with a vision. It's greed
right,
for, like, the immigrant family down the block got something that I don't have, and I'm mad at them
right.
for that, and I want to kick them out of the country. Like, it's petty. It's petty greed, which is what I say when I mean, like, things seem much coarser now and meaner than they have in the past.
And to me, it's not even linked to any genuine proposal or project for national renewal. Not really. Not in the sense that fascism in its interwar context was, or New Deal liberalism was, where it's this notion of national regeneration, that I just don't see. It just, again, it's just like you want to be in the winner. eh, You want to be in the winner's circle and not in the loser circle. That seems to me to be the major thing the major goal of the far right, which is why, again, as I've said before, and I could be proven wrong, I don't think they're going to be able to put together a lasting coalition. I don't think that's a winning coalition unless Trump suspends democracy and totally, just runs for president forever, even though he's quite old, and suspends congressional elections. I don't think like J.D. Vance is going to be set up well to run in 2028 because I don't really see a positive vision. People say that about the Democrats, which I agree with, but I also kind of don't really see that with the Republicans.
No, I think maybe to get back to your point about what you need to have a really ideological period. This is sort of, you're saying it's a post, I don't know, post printing press or post something that draws people together into a mass movement of some kind. So really, the historical norm has been that we didn't have these kinds of things. We didn't have these big ideological fights. We were not able to operate or not able to function on that basis. And maybe what we're seeing now is a return to that period where there's no overriding ideology, but we still have all the tools that made the big ideological fights of the 20th century possible, and we don't know what to do with them in the absence of anything to fight about, anything deep and meaningful.
Right. This is why
about.
Everyone's insane, I think. Right. We have a language and framework that these things matter. And the history of the last 15 years is that they obviously don't, right? You could go blue in the face yelling at each other on Twitter or now Blue Sky or X the Everything app, and who cares? It has no connection to actual politics. So people spend all their days like identifying as a communist or a fascist or whatever it is. And it's essentially various forms of cosplay because what you say and what you think doesn't matter because the system we have is so anti-democratic. If you're not literally in the room, no one's listening to you.
Danny, I think that might be a good place to end. What do you think?
Beautiful place to end. Well, Derek,
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks,
everyone, leave a comment. And also, not enough of you people who are watching are signing up to our YouTube. Sign up to the YouTube, review the show on Apple, sign up for the podcast for our wonderful bonus episodes. And also
make American prestige and the aggrandizement of this show
even greater.
Your ideology.
Yeah, and I think forward. Derek, I think I'm gonna end these YouTube videos with saying I love you. So I love you all, and thank you for listening. Bye.
Bye.